The Lufthansa Business Class review on an A350 from Los Angeles to Munich, presented by Mighty Travels Premium. We had initially booked Lufthansa Business Class to Munich from San Francisco. Just about a week before departure, Lufthansa had canceled the flight from San Francisco, so we would have to go via Los Angeles to Munich. Our connecting flight from San Francisco got us into LAX pretty early, and we were hoping that we could make use of one of the lounges in the international terminal for the wait. I had been to the Starlines lounge quite a while ago, about 2 years ago, and I thought it's a great place to spend a couple of hours. But this wasn't to be. All the lounges in the international terminal at LAX are currently closed as of October 2020. As an alternative, what you can do, you can walk up to the Alaska Airlines boardroom all the way in Terminal 6 as a priority pass member and use this lounge. It's quite a long way, and we felt it's just not worth it for what we had in mind. Instead, we decided to buy some food at Panda Express. That's currently the only open store in the international terminal food court, and later on make use of Starbucks, which was open and had full service. From our observations, it seemed like that there were obviously way fewer flights, but some of the flights were quite full. For instance, the Qatar Airways flight seemed to be quite full from our very anecdotal observations. Just after boarding was announced, we started walking down to our gate, took a couple of videos, and when we arrived there, we were quite surprised because it was already last call, and for a moment we thought we were in the wrong time zone. But what happened is most of the passengers had already boarded. There would only be about 30 people in economy and business class. And what we learned from the flight attendants later is that this would be quite a normal load for this flight. In fact, the last 6 months, not a lot more passengers per flight had been on these flights. So we were quite amazed that Lufthansa was even operating this flight. Obviously, we love that fact since we really wanted to go to Munich. Lufthansa has equipped their A350 business class with a slightly updated version of the seats they use for the Lufthansa A380 business class, which I have flown a couple of years ago. It isn't a major upgrade, as you can see right away. You will see that the business class itself is at least 2 generations behind what is currently standard in business class for most international airlines. The cabin do looked very neat. We felt we liked the color scheme, but it is a lot of seats. It's in a so-called 2-2-2 configuration with not a lot of privacy, or you might say no privacy at all. There's basically no stowage, and the lie flat position is more an angled lie flat than a real lie flat. I did expect that seat. I did some research before our flight. I think Lufthansa could do much better, but it is what it is. The good news too is that there's a lot of vertical space, so I was hoping one had won't have the issues that I had on Swiss Airlines, where I felt it's really tricky to turn when you sleep. Once you're in a sleep position, it's very difficult to get into a different sleeping position. The massive engines of this A350 had no trouble lifting us up. Since this plane might have had a lot of cargo, but in terms of passengers, it was as empty as it gets. There was also no runway wait. LAX wasn't as busy as we all remember it. After takeoff, we turned sharp left over the Pacific and turned south and then left and left again towards the US East Coast and pretty much straight east from there. According to the pilots, this should be a lot of tailwinds. So instead of going towards the polar route, which is often the standard for these flights, we would cross the Atlantic much further south and make use of these tailwinds up to 200 miles an hour. Meal service would start pretty quickly, and warm nuts and champagne would be served first. Read through the rather comprehensive menu and opted for the prawn appetizer and the beef main dish. I found both to be excellent, in fact, so good that I asked for another appetizer because I like the prawns so much. It's definitely a business class meal, definitely on par with where it should be. It was pretty excellent. I didn't like the dessert as much. I actually got a mix of all the different dessert options and thought none of them really stood out. I also had asked the flight attendants to prepare a small wine tasting for me, and to my surprise, they happily obliged to it. There were several excellent wines, so most of them Italian, that I thought were pretty outstanding. It got dark outside quickly, and most passengers reclined their seat immediately to catch some sleep. I wasn't as tired and watched the movie on the much improved compared to a few years ago entertainment system. I also love the light and very effective noise cancelling headphones that Lufthansa provides for every passenger in business class. Lufthansa just uses a thin mattress pad and no real mattress cover for the seat. They would provide a pajama top too, but no pants for this flight. I eventually fell asleep, but noticed that the temperature during this flight noticed a lot. It was initially freezing, and it was hot, and I was sweaty, and then I went back to freezing just a couple of hours. See how you can afford to fly business class and book five-star hotels for very little with Mighty Travels Premium. Get your 30-day free trial today. Click here on the menu card or go to mtp4u.com. Oddly, this business class cabin was taken up mostly by children under the ages of 10. Indeed, it felt at times there were more children than parents on this flight, and business class had been pretty full, although economy was basically empty. We actually had moved into the smaller mini cabin in the back, just behind the door, to avoid the children resisting their parents putting them to sleep at an early body hour. This proved to be a good strategy as the noise seemed quite strong just from up front. Economy cabin wouldn't be audible at all because simply it was so empty and everyone had a whole 9 seats to their own. Just when I fell asleep, we hit some major turbulence and the strong tailwinds, which we had anticipated earlier, really pushed us towards the island. Once I finally convinced myself to wake up and try the breakfast, we were just about 2 hours from our destination. I felt the breakfast catering was again delicious. I loved the chia pudding. Pilot was a chatty one and kept us informed about our current progress much more than usual. Before we headed closer to Munich, he informed us about a major turbulence that would hit us on our descent. However, that would not materialize and landing was quite orderly, um, especially given the turbulence we had experienced earlier in the flight. In summary, I'd say I was not sure what to expect of this flight given all the recent changes, given the current situation. I was certainly disappointed there was no lounge in LA, and Lufthansa wouldn't provide a restaurant voucher or took care in any other way of their premium passengers at the LAX airport. However, I do love the A350 airplane, and I thought the catering that Lufthansa provided was outstanding, and so were the flight attendants, which were not just friendly, they were just fantastic. I wasn't a fan of the seat. I think I probably never will be of any of the Lufthansa business class seats, but they did the trick. They worked decently and they allowed me to sleep. So you can't have it all sometimes. I would definitely fly Lufthansa again if I knew that the soft product, the catering, the service, the friendliness would be as good as on this flight. In just a few minutes, everyone got off the plane and we were led into Munich airport, which showed some signs of life, especially compared to the empty international terminal in LA we had witnessed a few hours earlier. The non-Schengen area of the terminal is actually very quiet and all the lounges were closed. But once you go through immigration, which had no lights, it had more immigration officers than passengers, you see quite a bit of crowds in the Schengen terminal. Most flights, incidentally, there would go to Stockholm, Greece, and Turkey, all destinations that either haven't cut down as much on travel or haven't introduced as strict border controls as most of the Europe. See how you can afford to fly business class and book five-star hotels for very little with Mighty Travels Premium. Get your 30-day free trial today. Click here on the menu card or go to mtp4u.com.